Good morning. The sermon I'm sharing with you today was originally written and presented by the Reverend Dr. Bruce Clear, the late Dr. Bruce Clear. He faithfully served UU congregations in Vancouver, Indianapolis, and Portland, Oregon. His work as a theologian and minister was defined by an abiding passion for social justice as well as the foundation, social justice as the foundation of the church community. And I'm honored to share his work with you today. Some of you may have heard Garrison Keillor's Thanksgiving story, in which Unitarians are featured. Somebody has got to find out what Garrison Keillor's experience is with Unitarians. He mentioned us frequently, and I might add, usually his comments, complimentary or critical, were right on the money. Now, in this story, he describes a Lake Wobegon family visiting relatives back east for the holidays, and he mentions that the relatives are Unitarians. And then he says something like this: a lot of folks say that Unitarians have no beliefs. That is not true. Unitarians have very strong beliefs. It's just that what those beliefs are depends upon what book they read last. Well, I said it was something like that. We are, it is true, often criticized this way. When it comes to religious beliefs, it's hard to pin down the UUs. Sometimes we are criticized, and rightly so, for having no beliefs. Sometimes we are criticized, and rightly so, for having too many beliefs. We believe anything we want. Sometimes those criticisms are appropriate. Sometimes they are not. See what I mean about it? It's hard to pin us down. The whole subject of Unitarian Universalism and their beliefs is a fuzzy one. The problem with this line of criticism is that, in addition to being true, it is mostly misguided and irrelevant. Unitarian Universalism is not a religion that is centered around a common religious belief system. A common religious belief system is sometimes called a creed, and it has been uniformly resisted and opposed throughout our history. Though we do not have a uniformly held religious belief system, I am convinced that we do hold a fairly uniform religious value system, like that expressed in our covenant. Values are quite different from creeds, but that is grist for a different sermon mill, I'm afraid. To say that we don't hold uniform beliefs does not mean we don't hold beliefs. On the contrary, most UUs I know as individuals have very strong opinions about all manner of subjects, and most of them are not shy about expressing them. The problem is that our beliefs are not consistent from one person to the next. Most UUs I know have not held the exact set of beliefs over the course of their lifetimes, but they've shifted them. They've altered them. They've modified their beliefs as time has passed. And most are not embarrassed to admit that. If the topic for discussion is Unitarian Universalist beliefs, the conversation is bound to be a fuzzy one. Our beliefs change from person to person at any one time, and our beliefs change from time to time for any one person. See, I have long seen this fuzziness as a strength, not a weakness. We humans are not omnipotent, and we form our beliefs based on the best information we have. If we're being responsible about our beliefs, they are bound to be altered in light of new information and new insights. We tend to agree with the French existentialist philosopher Simone de Beauvoir, who wrote, "To say that life is ambiguous is to assert that its meaning is never fixed, that it must constantly be one." Now, when I say that I have long felt this way, that our fuzziness of belief is a strength and not a weakness, I can prove it. Any honest assessment of human experience has to acknowledge its ambiguous nature. There is beauty in ambiguity. The reason we use resist the rigidity of religious creed, the reason for honoring tolerance and valuing an open mind, is that so much of experience is ambiguous. Simple answers to difficult questions may be reassuring, but they rarely reflect the complexity of experience. I am naturally suspicious of any answer, especially a religious answer, that is presented as certain, absolute, and simple. I am more open to answers if they are presented as tentative. Some years ago, when I was a seminary student, I praised ambiguity because it seemed to more accurately reflect human experience as I knew it. I praised it because it seemed to be the only honest way to live. I praised it because, like art, ambiguity lends itself to the aesthetic richness of interpretation. I praised it because its alternatives, various forms of certainties, were unacceptable to me. This morning, I can praise ambiguity for all those reasons, but I have a new one to add to the list. In addition to its consistency with the human psyche, in addition to its beauty of interpretation, in addition to it being a cornerstone of the free mind, ambiguity, I have discovered, has the added value of being true. It's not that we experience the world ambiguously. The world is ambiguous. Now this time, though, I have a new and improved word. I have traded the word ambiguous for the word fuzzy. It's a much more common sense expression of the same idea. Now, I encountered this new word and this new insight from a member of my congregation who a few months ago recommended a book entitled Fuzzy Thinking, The New Science of Fuzzy Logic. The author is Bart Costco, a professor of electrical engineering at the University of Southern California. Now, what's intriguing in this book, at least for me, is not the justification that our vague opinions are valid simply because the human mind can't be certain about things, but rather the conclusion that our vague or fuzzy or ambiguous opinions may be justified because the world itself is a fuzzy world. Religious fundamentalisms are the natural product of certainty. They are the consequence of a belief that what we know is actually the way things are. But absolutisms of certainty, they're not restricted to religious ideas. One finds absolutists in nearly every field of knowledge, including every branch of the sciences. When someone presents an idea as beyond all doubt. Now, I have long admired John Dewey's 1929 Gifford lectures, which were published under the title, The Quest for Certainty. In those lectures, Dewey questions all absolutisms, religious, philosophical, scientific, with the argument that the human mind is fallible and subject to all manner of influence that can skew its understanding. Here's one way that he says it. The world as we experience it is a real world, but it's not, in its primary phases, a world that is known, a world that is understood, and is intellectually coherent and secure. Unquote. In other words, the human mind can get it wrong. And so we can never be content that the ideas and opinions we form about the world are fully certain. Any fundamentalism or absolutism or rigid doctrine about life is only as reliable as the fallible human mind. The quest for knowledge is a legitimate quest, for we can learn new insights and improve our understanding, but the quest for certainty is always ultimately illusory. And this is where I was years ago on the subject of ambiguity. We can never be absolutely certain about anything because the human mind makes mistakes. What Bart Costco adds to this conversation is that the quest for certainty is thwarted not just because the mind is fuzzy, but because the world itself is fuzzy too. From the time of the Greeks, we have been misled into believing that statements about the world must be either true or false, right or wrong. Either ocean tides are controlled by the moon, or they are not. Either an orange is orange, or it isn't. Either gravity holds water in a cup, or it doesn't. We have turned statements of facts into idols about which there can be no doubt. The earth is flat, we once said, with certainty, and the sun moves around it. The earth is round, we said later, with equal certainty, and it moves around the sun. The earth is not round, it's egg-shaped or pear-shaped. And the sun is not a sun, it's a star. What all these statements have in common is that they were each propositions that were true or false, right or wrong. They were not just estimates or guesses, they were statements of fact. The prevailing assumption of Western thought is that all statements must be true or false, completely true or completely false, no degrees in between. Our thinking left no room for something to be partially true or partially false. Black, white, no shades of gray. But it turns out, after many centuries of working with this mistaken notion, that our statements about the world are only approximations, more or less right. All statements fall somewhere in a continuum between true and false, right and wrong. There is still some truth in the statement the earth is flat. It's just there's not very much truth in it. The earth we plant a garden patch on, it's flat. That's only a very small part of the earth. If you connect it to the bigger parts of the earth, you see it really is round, or egg-shaped, or pear-shaped. The statement the earth, in fact, is flat has an extremely small truth value. The statement the earth is round is a significantly larger truth value. But there is more truth value if we say instead of round that it resembles an egg or a pear. It seems to say it's more true, but it's not certain or absolute truth. Any statement we make about anything in the world is necessarily fuzzy or vague, though some statements are more fuzzy than others. All statements about reality or statements of degree. Are rocks hard? Well, more or less, but usually more. Some rocks, more so than others. Is the sky blue? Well, more or less, but usually more. Is snow cold? Well, more or less, but usually more. Is snow warm? Well, more or less, but usually less, and so on. So reality is not black and white choices, always shades of gray. Costco says it this way. The fuzzy view says that almost all truth is gray truth, partial truth, fractional truth, fuzzy truth. Math, by the way, it's the only exception. Math is the only thing that is either true or false, black or white, but then math statements have nothing to do with the world. They only tell us about numbers. Costco quotes Einstein as one of the great prophets of fuzzy thinking when he observed that so far as the laws of mathematics refer to reality, they are not certain. And so far as they are certain, they do not refer to reality. So from this, it would seem that Einstein embraced a very fuzzy reality. So, fuzzy thinking simply means acknowledging that the truth about everything in the world is a matter of degrees, shades of gray. Costco describes audiences. He asks them to raise their hand in response to the questions. How many of you are tall? How How many of you are honest? How many of you are rested? There's no definite answer. There's fuzzy answers to such questions. People are more or less tall, more or less honest, more or less rested. Some are much more, and some are much less of each. Though ancient Greeks, like Aristotle, taught us to think in terms of certainty, they could also have taught us fuzzy thinking. Costco notes that Zeno's great paradoxes were models for fuzzy thinking. Zeno instructs us, for example, look at a pile of sand. Ask ourselves if it is a pile. Yes, it is. Take away 1 grain of sand. Is it still a pile? Yes. Take away another grain. Ask the question. Then a third, a fourth, a fifth grain. Take away thousands, each time asking the question, is there a point when it's no longer a pile? Will it be a pile of sand when there are 2 grains left? 1 grain? No grains? The statement, this is a pile of sand, is a fuzzy statement because there is no way of determining exactly when it is and when it isn't a pile of sand. Bertrand Russell, whom Costco identifies as one of the early prophets of fuzz, put that on a business card, Bertrand Russell, prophet of fuzz. He called it vagueness. He did the same thing with baldness. Take away 1 hair from the head, then another. When does one become bald? Now, I know these mind tricks are not everybody's cup of tea, and I want to assure you before I go any further that there is a point that I want to make with all of this. Now, for those of you who don't care to play the word games I've been playing, please know I do hope to make this all relevant before I finish. I do know that there are some of you, however, that, like me, enjoy these sorts of games, so I got one more example to play with. This one comes not from Costco, but from James Gleek in his book, Chaos. It's an example that troubled me for quite a long time before I read about fuzzy thinking. Gleek tells the story of Benoit Mandelbrot, a mathematician, who asked a very sensible question. How long is the coast of Britain? So he imagined measuring it. Now take a picture from an airplane or satellite. You'll use reference points to measure it. You'll get a measurement. But you'll miss all the subtleties of small inlets. So you got to get closer and measure the inlets. And your measurement will be longer. If you get close enough, you'll see the water flowing around large boulders that jut out into the bay, so you have to measure around those boulders. Your measurement will be longer. But the coastline includes not just boulders, but rocks, pebbles. You got to measure those. You got to measure the water flow around them. Your measurement is going to get longer. Don't forget the grains of sand. And those grains of sand contain a molecular structure that juts out, just like the boulders jut out. They're smaller, but they still should be measured. At each level, the more precise the measurement, the longer the length of the coastline. Gleek says that Mandelbrot found that as the scale of measurement becomes smaller, the measured length of a coastline rises without limit. Bays and peninsulas revealing ever smaller sub-bays, sub-peninsulas, at least down to atomic scales when the process finally does come to an end. Perhaps. Now, in this imaginary measurement process, each step toward precision reveals how much more still needs to be measured. Each attempt to be precise reveals how imprecise the answer is. In Costco's book, he says that precision increases fuzziness.
Nice.
He quotes his own teacher, Lofty Zadeh, chair of the engineering department at the University of California, who said, the closer one looks at a real-world problem, the fuzzier becomes its solution. So it's time now, I suppose, to leave the mind games that I find so intriguing in Costco's book, try to find a principle or a value that they point to. The reason for presenting these various mental exercises is simply to illustrate Costco's thesis, Fuzzy thinking is justified because the world that we seek to understand is a fuzzy world, not a precise and a certain one. Now there is, I admit, a grave danger in embracing this fuzzy thinking. If all our knowledge is fuzzy, because the world that we know is fuzzy, it would be easy and mistaken to conclude that it doesn't matter what we believe. What we believe isn't going to be precisely certain anyway, and we aren't going to get it right no matter what we do. See, this is the complaint, you will recall, that is often lodged against Unitarian Universalists. Doesn't matter what they believe. You can believe anything they want. Does fuzzy thinking lead us inevitably to such philosophical and theological apathy or nihilism? Does our inability to know anything for certain trivialize what we do believe about the human soul, or about the purpose of life, or about the meaning of death, about right or wrong, good and evil, about God, about anything of importance? This is not, to me, the lesson to be gained from understanding fuzzy thinking. Fuzzy thinking is not about getting things right, but about getting things right more or less. Now, this is not because fuzzy answers are some kind of consolation prizes to make up for our inability to know things for sure. Rather, we value fuzzy answers because they are the right answers to fuzzy questions. If questions about rocks and coastlines are fuzzy, how much more fuzzy must answers be about questions concerning the meaning of life? We hold beliefs because we want answers that are right, more or less. The task is to keep working at it until we are more and more right. Garrison Keillor's characterization of us was accurate. Unitarians have very strong beliefs. It is just that what those beliefs are depends on what book they last read. It's both a criticism and a compliment. And it affirms a certain fuzziness, in the positive sense of that word, that's at the heart of who we are. We usually call it a search for truth. We sometimes even call it a religious journey. Whatever we call it, we look forward to the next book, the next encounter, the next conversation, expecting our ideas to be more clearly formed and more adequate than before. Our religious values teach an openness to new ideas, new views. That value suggests an inherent uncertainty and tentativeness, a fuzziness. If we were certain about our truths, we'd have no use for open-mindedness. And there's one other aspect worth mentioning. Consider the statement cited earlier by the engineering professor, Lofty Zadeh. The closer one looks at a real-world problem, the fuzzier becomes the solution. And that's why I suggest that most Unitarian Universalists are suspicious not only of rigid answers, but simplistic ones. The religious journey and the search for truth continue. And in the next leg of that journey, I will not be afraid of fuzzy questions or fuzzy answers. Reverend Dr. Bruce Clear.